In the dead hours of Gotham's night, there's a shape that does not fit. He's not a god like the ones who tear open the sky. He's not an alien who fell from the stars. He is a silhouette on a rooftop, and a question no one has ever truly answered. Who is Batman when the mask comes off? For the people who live under his gargoyles, the answer is never simple. Some whisper that he's a government weapon. Others swear he's a vampire. A few insist he's a billionaire playing war with his city. And somewhere out there, on an anonymous conspiracy forum, a very familiar man logs in under a fake name and quietly adds fuel to every one of those theories. If you lived in Gotham, you would never meet Batman at a Comic-Con. You'd meet him as a rumor, a shadow, a blur in a news broadcast as he slams through the side of a van. You'd see still frames on the evening news, grainy security footage from a dock or warehouse, and a talking head insisting they've enhanced the image enough to prove he's real. In a world where people have watched an alien lift an island into the sky and a warrior princess deflect bullets with bracelets, you might think the guy in the cape would be the simple one. Just a man. Just a vigilante. Just a lunatic with money. But inside the DC universe, the question, who is Batman, is not a solved equation. It's an ecosystem of competing theories, half-truths, corporate spin, and street-level superstition. Police, politicians, late-night hosts, conspiracy cranks, billionaire gossip shows. Each has a different answer, and each answer says as much about them as it does about the man they're trying to pin down. Some people don't even believe there is a man. Some are convinced he's a government project that never made it into the official budget. Others are sure he's a rotating task force of black ops soldiers wearing the same mask. And then there's the theory that everyone laughs at in public and quietly believes in private. Batman is Bruce Wayne. Tonight, we're stepping into that world. Not our world, where these are just comics and movies, but the world on the page. The world where Gotham breathes, where the bat signal cuts through real clouds, and where ordinary citizens are stuck watching from below as their city is defended, exploited, and mythologized by forces way bigger than they are. In that world, Batman is not just a person. He is a hypothesis, a ghost pinned to a corkboard of red string and newspaper clippings. If you're an in-universe conspiracy theorist with a functioning internet connection, the Bruce Wayne theory is where you start. On paper, it sounds almost too obvious. A city drowning in corruption just happens to produce a masked vigilante with impossible gadgets, military-grade vehicles, and access to experimental tech. At the same time, Gotham is home to a famously reclusive billionaire whose company designs experimental tech, who has a habit of adopting black-haired teenagers every few years, and whose mansion might as well have a revolving door for traumatized wards. The dots practically connect themselves. In this version of the story, Bruce Wayne isn't just a donor or a distant benefactor. He is Batman. People point to his dead parents, the tragic alleyway story that tabloids can't let go of, and say, of course he snapped. Of course he turned grief into a crusade. They talk about how Bruce publicly admitted, at one point, that his company had been funding Batman's war on crime. He framed it as philanthropy, as a way of supporting Gotham's mysterious protector. But for a certain kind of mind, that confession is not an ending. It's a beginning. If he can fund Batman, why not be Batman? The problem with this theory, for the average Gotham resident, is that it feels too clean, too cinematic. People who actually live in chaos rarely trust the neat explanation. That's why even inside this theory, it starts to fracture into branches. Some insist Bruce is truly the man in the suit, doing all of this himself. Others argue he's too busy, too public, too soft. They imagine board meetings, charity galas, press conferences. It's hard to picture the smiling billionaire disappearing for nights on end without someone noticing. So the theory evolves. A more practical version says that Wayne is not Batman, but he hires Batman. In this model, Batman is a rotating cast of special operations veterans, ex-intelligence agents, and black budget assets. Wayne writes the checks, Wayne Enterprises builds the toys, and a small army of trained operatives takes turns wearing the symbol. If one dies, another steps in. If one gets compromised, they quietly disappear. And the evidence. There are moments scattered through Gotham's history where more than one Batman seems to be operating. Stories slip out of Arkham and Blackgate about the Cape moving differently, about a different height, a different weight, a different voice. Cat burglars who've spent years dancing on rooftops with the Dark Knight quietly remark that the man they kissed once had a different jawline than the one they're running from now. Even people close to him have, on rare occasions, hinted that there have been several Batmen since the first. That gets amplified by the rare periods when someone else really does wear the cowl. Oh, when a former boy wonder steps into the role and the city keeps functioning. The theory that Batman is a succession of men, not one immortal crusader, becomes very hard to disprove. When a police commissioner pilots a mechanized bat suit on behalf of the state, it only confirms the idea that the symbol is portable. If the public sees different silhouettes but the same logo, conspiracy culture takes care of the rest. What almost no one knows is that the man at the center of all these theories sometimes sits alone at a computer screen under a disposable username and deliberately nudges the discussion. He logs into anonymous forums and drops just enough proof that Batman is Bruce Wayne to keep the theory alive, and just enough contradictory data to keep it ridiculous. Because if the world believes that only a crazy billionaire could be Batman, then no one will ever look twice at the broken man standing right in front of them. Not everyone thinks Batman is a billionaire at all. In a universe where governments build secret prisons in alternate dimensions and run black sites deep beneath their own cities, the idea that Batman is a state project is almost comforting. If you're a citizen struggling to sleep under the sound of distant sirens, believing that someone, somewhere, authorized this man might feel safer than believing he's just doing this on his own. In this theory, Batman is a Black Ops program, either federal or deeply embedded inside Gotham's own police structure. The bat signal isn't a plea to a rogue, it's a secured channel to a classified asset. The commissioner doesn't work with a vigilante. He's handling a weapon that came out of a budget meeting no one will ever see. Moments in history seem to support this. There have been times when the police officially replaced Batman with one of their own, putting a lawman in a power suit and calling it the same legacy. There have been contingency plans, ghost Batmen, former officers trained as successors in case the original fell. To people who believe in institutions, these stories aren't glitches in the legend. They're the real truth poking through. In this worldview, Batman is a tool the state uses to cut through a corrupt system. He beats confessions out of criminals the courts can't touch. He moves outside red tape, then quietly hands the results to the people who file the paperwork. His theatrical costume is not the point. The point is plausible deniability. But as the world gets stranger, the theory shifts again. The line between state power and corporate power blurs, and Batman gets pulled into that fog. Some people argue he isn't a government project at all. He's a corporate one, a joint venture between global giants like Wayne Enterprises, LexCorp, and other faceless multinationals that have more money than most nations. In this model, Batman is a brand strategy. Batman raids a warehouse owned by a corrupt middleman. The owners go down in scandal, the property value craters. And then, like vultures in business suits, the corporations swoop in and buy the land, the buildings, the infrastructure. Cheap. From there, the theory turns grand. Batman's interventions in supervillain crises become asset protection, a private way for corporations to secure supply chains, protect cities they invest in, and quietly influence the behavior of superhumans. His contributions to world-saving teams become a mechanism of surveillance. He's the human-shaped backdoor built into the world's greatest heroes, a knight on the board quietly placed there by men who sign paychecks, not peace treaties. And nothing fuels that theory more than the idea that a certain bald industrialist might be involved. There is a particular strain of belief that Batman is secretly aligned with the greatest corporate mind on the planet. A man obsessed with human potential and deeply suspicious of anyone who flies. This version of Batman is an extrajudicial agent of a ruthlessly rational ideology. No aliens, no gods, no magic. Just a human at peak performance, outthinking monsters with money, technology, and preparation. It fits a specific narrative. If you want the world to idolize humanity over the superhuman, you create a hero who stands next to aliens and yet remains only human. You showcase him as the ultimate argument that humans don't need gods. Of course, there's an even darker variation. In some living rooms and late-night bars, people quietly suggest that Batman isn't just funded by the rich. He's scripted by them. They whisper that the rogues, the colorful maniacs, and themed criminals are all part of a show. That the mafia and higher criminal powers bankroll entire acts to distract law enforcement and media, while real deals happen in the dark. Batman becomes both performer and enforcer in an elaborate drama. While the city stares at the man in the cape fighting a clown, smuggling routes reopen, and white-collar crimes go unnoticed. To a certain kind of mind, this is the only explanation that makes sense. In a city where crime feels endless and corruption never truly dies, Batman himself starts to look less like a cure, and more like part of the disease. Then, there are the people who look up at the bat signal and refuse to believe there's even a person attached to it. On the superstitious end of Gotham's spectrum, Batman is something else entirely. A creature, a curse, the city's own vampire. This theory thrives in the alleys and in the early years. When Batman is more rumor than fact, criminals stumble into holding cells babbling about a monster that moved faster than they could see, shrugged off bullets, vanished into smoke. Even when clearer images of him start circulating, high-resolution shots from Justice League press events, daytime appearances next to heroes who can level cities, people find ways to separate those two figures. In their minds, the Batman who stands in the sunlight beside an alien in a red cape is not the same entity who crawls out of Gotham's shadows. One is a PR-friendly tactical expert, a human consultant among gods. The other is the thing that follows you down a dead-end alley, that whispers in the dark as your gun runs out of bullets. So the legend splits. The League gets a man. Gotham keeps the monster. From there, the theories get wilder. Some imagine that Batman is literally undead, a vampire who never ages, changing identities over decades while pretending to be his own heir. In this version, the Wayne fortune is a mask, just like the Cowl. Bruce Wayne is just the current alias of a predator who's been haunting Gotham since its earliest days, quietly siphoning blood in the same city he claims to defend. Others picture him as a hybrid, a Daywalker who has all the gifts of the night without the traditional weaknesses. They talk about secret blood banks hidden under the city, about controlled hunger and carefully managed victims. It's urban folklore with a cape, embroidered at late-night diners and on message boards where every blurry rooftop photo is proof. And then there are worlds where the symbolism becomes literal. Alternate histories where Batman dies not as a man in a cave, but as a martyr of resistance. In those stories, his body is broken by an authoritarian god in a red cape, and his death becomes a rallying cry. Batman stops being a single identity and becomes a template. Masks, hoods, and makeshift ears worn by rebels across an empire. The question, who is Batman, dissolves into a different one. How many of us are willing to be him? Even in the main continuity, pieces of that idea bleed through. Young partners grow up and wear the cowl. Former allies take on the role when the original disappears. Police officers are trained as contingency replacements. There are times, brief, chaotic times, when more than one bat silhouette moves through the city at once. For the outside world, this just feeds the most resilient theory of all. That Batman is not a man, a monster, or a project. He is a role. an empty shape that keeps being filled by whoever Gotham needs, or whoever is willing to sacrifice themselves to the symbol. And yet, hovering over all of this, there's one more unsettling layer. Some of the villains know. Some of the people who have fought him in hallways and on rooftops, who have seen him up close with the mask cracked and the voice shaking, know exactly who he really is. They know the address, the history, the trauma, and they say nothing. Not because they fear retaliation, but because they understand something the rest of the world doesn't. The fragile line between the man under the mask and the thing he becomes when that line is cut. Revealing his name might not end Batman. It might destroy the last bit of humanity that restrains him. So they keep the secret, not out of mercy, but out of self-preservation. Inside the DC universe, Batman's identity is not a simple reveal at the end of a comic. It's a battlefield. To some, he's a grieving billionaire who turned his childhood nightmare into a mission. To others, he's a black-budget weapon that slipped off the leash. For those who worship power in suits and skyscrapers, he's a corporate instrument, a brand carefully managed by men who never touch the ground. And for the haunted and the desperate, he's a vampire, a myth, or an army waiting to be awakened. The truth, of course, is locked behind a very small number of eyes. The man who puts on the cowl, the allies who trusted him enough to carry it in his absence, the enemies who saw enough to realize that unmasking him would only unleash something worse. But in a way, the real answer may not be the most important one, because every theory reveals something critical about the world he inhabits. The belief that he's a government project comes from people who are used to power hiding behind acronyms and classified files. The idea that he's a corporate psyop grows in a culture that has watched companies buy and sell entire cities. The vampire stories thrive among people who walk home afraid and need their terror to feel supernatural, not systemic. And the Bruce Wayne theory, the one that refuses to die, is born from a simple instinct that a world this broken might, just once, produce a rich man who chooses to bleed with the rest of them. Somewhere in that maze of projection, fear, and hope, the real Batman moves quietly, letting the noise cover his tracks. Sometimes he even helps it along, dropping lies into the current, bending the narrative just enough to keep the world looking in the wrong direction. Because as long as Gotham argues over who he really is, they'll never be ready for the only answer that truly matters to him. That he is whoever the city needs him to be tonight. And tomorrow, if necessary, he will be someone else again. Now I want to hear from you. Which Batman identity theory do you think is closest to the truth? And why?